Okay, whenever you're ready.
Okay, here we are out in the orchard, down the row, Fifth Crow in Pescadero actually, looking at apples in this instance. Let's zone in a little bit and look at this specific tree a little bit and talk about its attributes. This is a variety called Enterprise, and it is one of quite a number of varieties that were bred as part of a collaborative breeding program started after the Second World War. PRI, Purdue, Rutgers, and Illinois. And in a cutesy manner, they tend to name their varieties with the letters P, R, and I consecutively. Williams Pride, in this case, Enterprise, and on, Prima, and on like that. Enterprise, now you want a real red apple, and it's hard to get a real red apple, comma, that tastes good. Enterprise might be your friend. It's big, juicy, redder than red, really nice snow white flesh, got a good crunch, got good juice, got good sugar, got a little balancing acidity, and is by and large a regular annual producer almost no matter what the season. And we can look at this tree here. It's a tree 5-6 years old, mature, and it's got what I would call an almost perfect ratio between the amount, the volume of fruit, and vegetative growth. If you look here, this is the current season's growth. About 1 foot 15 inches, which for a mature tree that has so much of its resources, i.e. carbohydrates, invested in the fruit set, and make no bones about it, fruit is a carbohydrate sink. My joke being the corporate robber baron of carbohydrates. It just sucks up the carbs. So you need to be attended to providing adequate overall carbohydrates for all the other needs of the tree, and that's done with a couple simple 3 things like that. Make sure you've got good soil fertility, natural soil, built up soil, good watering, weeds are at bay like that, and you make resources available for the tree's growth, vegetative as well as fruitful. So we've got a really nice set. This tree is thinned down, and you've got good spacing between apples. Enterprise itself is a moderately big apple, maybe 8-10 ounces, but with the spacing we have here and the overall sheen of the leaves and the extension growth, I'd say this year these fruits should be somewhat to slightly bigger than the norm. So it looks good. We're in mid-season. Coming around, if we're a horse race, a racetrack, the announcer might say, we're coming around the clubhouse bend, we're headed for the home stretch. Again, at this time of year, you've done your work or you haven't. The weather has cooperated or it hasn't, and it is what it is, as they say, or the tree don't lie. And what is the tree saying, as it were? It's been a good year in the aggregate. We've got good fruit set, good sizing for mid-season, and good vegetative extension. So let's just take a little step back and talk about the tree, the season, not so much this tree, but trees and the season, the fruit season. There is no real fruit season, of course there is, but it's rather a bunch of different segments of the season that line up. And how things go, that is your input and care, and then how the weather goes beyond your control really determines how good your season's gonna be. Wintertime, dormancy, you want cold, cold, cold. You need to accumulate good chill. Good chill gives rise to a big bloom, many flowers with big petals, a lot of pollen, real good for access for pollinators. So a good winter chill, good bloom, good weather during the bloom, not too much or any rain, wind, cold temps in the 60s plus, little or no rain, little or no wind usually gets you good pollination and fruit set. So that's kind of the advent of the season, and you're off and running into the season. You get flowering, you get fruit pollination, you get fruit set, and then you get leafing out. And then last thing to happen in the season, mid-spring or so, is that you start to get branch extension. And so, of course, good weather facilitates that, and good care facilitates supporting all the component parts of the tree doing what they need to do at the right time like that. But also keep in mind, unseen right now internally, and this starts right around bloom time and it's at its peak right now. Next year's fruit buds are forming, and they will continue to develop through the end of the growing season. And that is going to be a principal determinant, again, along with the weather, in terms of how good your bloom is going to be next year. So it's critical to have adequate resources available to the tree because, again, the fruit is such a sink for carbohydrates. And again, you do that with your inputs in a timely and judicious manner. So this year, specifically, along the central coast of California here, we had what I would call a wicked wet winter. We got 65 plus inches of rain. It wasn't just that it was almost an epic amount, it was the intensity of it and the duration of it. Our wet season lasted well into April, even late April. And then spring, well, there really wasn't that much of a spring. There were a few little gaps where there was some sun and warmth, but generally continued to be cloudy and cold in the spring. Now, apples were situated perfectly in terms of the time of bloom. We had a nice couple-week window where it was a little bit warmer and a lot less rainy when the apples bloom. Consequently, growers along the coast here have a pretty good apple set. Same thing with pears. Not so much to like nada with stone fruits. The early part of the season was wet and cold. Very little plum, peach, prune, apricot set like that. But the apples are doing well. And then even within the apples themselves, some varieties doing better than others in terms of the crop they did or didn't set. And this speaks to diversification. If you had an orchard that was all enterprise, you'd be happy. If you had an orchard that was all, we have another variety over here called Holstein, which is an excellent apple, but there's hardly a fruit on the trees. So if you have a good year and you have limited varieties, that's great. If you have a bad year and you have limited varieties, not so good. So this idea of mixing it up a little bit with varietal diversity is good to a certain extent. I would say you want to have maybe 3-4 early season ripeners, 3-4 mid-season ripeners, and 3-4, 5, or 6 late season ripeners. The early and the late will get you sales big time. The mid-season is when the mid-season ripening apples have the most full, robust taste. The balance between crunch, sugar, and acidity. Been talking about this tree, Enterprise apple, and in the aggregate the trees in this orchard this year with apples. A pretty good, almost perfect balance between the amount of fruit set and extension growth, vegetative growth. So fruit set is good, obviously, and extension growth is also good because that gives you more leaves for more photosynthesis to feed carbohydrates into this year's crop, but also helps with the development of fruit buds internally for next year's crop. And then very shortly, as these trees stop growing, extension growth for the season, they will then take the resources, carbohydrates, from photosynthesis and shuttle it down to the roots to store for the winter, again, to get a good start next year. So let's look at how this tree has grown vegetatively. If you look down here where I'm pointing, you can see the demarcation of older, grayer, thicker wood and younger, more bronzy wood. So this tree has grown from here all the way up to here, about 15, 18 inches. And that would be anything more than 10, 12 inches on a mature tree that has a good fruit set would be considered most excellent. And it is still actively growing. I know that because if I look at the tip of the branch here, you can see there are still nubbin, young leaves unfurling. Maybe we'll get another 3-4 inches of growth this spring, this summer rather, and it all bodes well. At some point, however, maybe 3 weeks down the line, we're in the middle of July, sometime in mid-August, this tree is going to shut down, in a sense, in terms of further extension growth. And that'll be evidenced by it sets, instead of unfurling more leaves in the tip bud, it'll start to form a big fat terminal bud. It means trees stop growing. Thereafter, all the resources in this tree go exclusively to the fruit, size it up, sweeten it up, good balance of sugar and acids, of course, and then pumping resources, carbohydrates, to store in the inner bark of the major branches and particularly in the roots of the tree to shuttle back out again to start regrowth up next year. So let's look here at an example of another bud from another place on this tree. And if you can look in here, you can see the beginning formation of a fat terminal bud. This will become much more obvious and pronounced as the season progresses. And that's it. Thereafter, that branch ain't gonna grow no more. Again, resources getting shuttled elsewhere, fruit and root for next year.